we've got 4 volumes of Miguel de Cervantes, Don Quixote. This is just one of those books that everybody should read. There is no excuse for you having not read this book. Okay, Don Quixote de la Mancha, an absolute favorite of mine, right? Of course, there is, in my opinion, a tremendous filler in this great book. Tremendous filler. Some parts should have been cut out completely. Some scenes, some everything that doesn't have to do with our duo here, which is, of course, Don Quixote and his servant, uh, whose name I have forgotten for some reason. What's his name? Jesus, I forgot. But anyway, the guy on the donkey, Jesus. But anyway, Don Quixote, he is a noble, and something happened to him, which I can't really tell what really drove him to just be secluded, and he started reading all of these books about knighthood and so on, right? These fantasy books of the time, and I think it is due to old age and senility and so on that he kind of loses his marbles a bit. Don Quixote, he kind of loses his mind a bit, and he just imagines himself as this knight in shining armor, and he goes on this journey. Why he goes on this journey? For what purpose? I don't really know. He's a bit deranged, and everything about this character is so iconic, so memorable. And of course, this has to do with comedy and tragedy and the absurd, even the surreal. Because everything about this guy, the armor he wears is just rusty and just goofy, when he puts it on. And his horse, he sees his horse as this stallion, but it's just this old beaten horse that just can barely move and so on, right? And he sees these windmills as giants and so on, right? Everything about him, he has to exaggerate, he has to escalate everything because he lives in a fantasy. He is alive in his imagination, right? Because these books have taken over his mind, and he can't. No, he. It's not that he can't tell the difference between fantasy, fiction, and reality. Is that he has completely replaced reality with his fiction, with his fantasies, with with his fetishes, right? And he goes on this journey with his pal here, and it's just hilarious. Some of the scenes here are just hilarious and awkward and just a joy to read. He sees giants and monsters and so on. The fight against the windmills, of course, represent just taking things to the utmost absurd proportions. There's nothing there, dude, but you're seeing things that are, you think they are the enemies, but they're inanimate objects and so on. Right? This is a journey here of the of the old man that is on his last breath. All right, and by the end, he comes to. He has a moment of clarity, and he realizes that the woman he thought, Dulcinea, she was just some ugly wench and so on. He comes to the conclusion that everything that he stood for and everything that he imagined was true and correct and of course plausible, and so on, they were all a joke, a farce, a sham. He almost, it's like he tricked himself into believing this fantasy, because I don't know, his life was too dull, and so on, and he just lost himself completely in those books. And this is a warning for some people who, you know it's not that they take some books too seriously and obsess over them. It's like they implant themselves into the story. They they replace the protagonist with themselves, and they just, sometimes they never come out of it, right? And even if they do, they are not the same person. It's good that you love books and you take them seriously, but you don't have to obsess over them to such an extent. A great example of this is The Catcher in the Rye, where some people, for some reason, they just lose their minds by reading and rereading that book. There's something about that book. It does something to them, right? And it shows how childish they are, right? They're childish on one side, and the other is that they have problems that they didn't deal with at the appropriate time with the appropriate measures, right? There is no reason for you to be so obsessed with a piece of fiction. And I absolutely love some books, but that's gonna not that book is not gonna just twist my mind so that I forget about myself and so on. That is not the trait of a mature person, that you can be swayed so easily by a piece of fiction, right? And I love books, all right, but I'm not just gonna become a sort of puppet for these books, right? And anybody who says something bad about that book, I'm just gonna lose my mind. It's not gonna happen, right? But anyway, back to Don Quixote. Um, so by the end, he comes to, but he is, of course, he's an old man, and he's already exhausted from this journey. But when he realizes that he was living a lie, and that he made a fool of himself, uh, every second of every day since he put on the armor and went on this journey, I mean, that just eats him alive, and it just destroys him, right, mentally, and so on. He doesn't recover from this, and it's like I said, it's a tragic comedy, because he doesn't make it, right? He doesn't make it, um, and it is a cautionary tale, right? Books are great, books are fantastic, but you cannot lose yourself in them to the degree of Don Quixote and others, because you might not survive, right? You cannot be so childish, so easily manipulated, right? But there's so much more about this book. It is something to behold. Listen, this is just one of those books that everybody has to read, because some say it's bland and outdated, and listen, the core elements, subject the core subject matter here is timeless. Of course, it is timeless. And the creativity of the writer is just, I mean, when you understand when this was written, I mean, and it's been 500 years, right? I mean, it still stands up, it still holds uh, that level of quality, that standard. Okay. And like I said, there are filler moments here, there are boring parts. I mean, some chapters are just, what is this, bro? I don't care about these secondary filler characters. Go back to these guys, right? But anyway, the conclusion is, sometimes you should calm down. You should calm down and not see, you know, enemies or animosity in windmills or in other people and so on. Don't be rash. Calm down. Don't blow things out of proportion. Don't assume that everybody's against you, um, and so on, right? If you have problems, don't blame them on somebody else, and so on, right? And the most important part here is that, you know, most people imagine that they are the greatest, that they are infallible, right? And they don't get that they are being foolish, that they appear to other people as a Don Quixote, as a senile old, you know, Looney Tune almost, right? They dress absurdly and they just have these annoying personalities and so on, and they think that they are absolutely the pinnacle of anything, right? Nobody can be like them, and they don't get it, that they're foolish, awkward, goofy, right? And so on. And this is a great book because it shows clearly that this is a disease, right? It might be a mental illness, it might be a flaw of character, a combination of both, and so on. It's a great book. It's pretty thick. Like I said, some filler, but anyway. You should read it for the comedy and the wisdom that it has, okay? And even the author's life is a sort of saga, an odyssey, like Dostoevsky's. He was poor. He didn't finish his education as a physician. He went to war and he got maimed. Right, he almost lost an arm and so on. He became a cripple, and then he was kidnapped by pirates. But as he was going home, and he was a slave for years, right? And then his ransom was paid, and he finally went home, and he thought, okay, I served my time, I'm just gonna get mine. He wants a job in the military, and he just gets this lame ass job instead, right? And so on. And then he writes the first part of Don Quixote, a great success, etc. And then some clown, some uh, some copycat, decides to ride on this fame, and he writes the second part of Don Quixote, right? And of course, Cervantes, he says, "Fuck that shit," and he writes the second part, and of course, the rest is history. Here we have it, the great book, right? And you should read it. Read more books; they are fantastic.